Hello, I'm Dr. Harriet Farad.
And I'm Juliana Forlano, here with our podcast, Capitalism Hits Home.
This is a show about the intersection of capitalism, race, gender, class, and all the intersecting aspects of our personal lives.
Our aim is to educate, activate, and hopefully alleviate some of the burdens we're all experiencing living in a capitalist USA.
We hope this program serves you well, and of course, we hope for feedback so that it will serve you well. It's brought to you by Democracy at Work. Our main topic for the show today will be capitalism and the effects of being constantly lied to.
Oh, I'm so thrilled that that's the topic. We'll also be getting to the headlines in a moment. But right now, we thought we'd briefly share with you how capitalism has hit us at our homes since last week. Harriet, what did you experience this week?
Well, one thing I experienced was that I was in New York City, walking behind a man muttering to himself, maskless, coughing violently, and spitting on the ground. And that combined with an experience I'd had the day before by sitting in Washington Square Park and seeing cops patrolling without masks. And so that experience of capitalism in which everybody is an island without noticing their effects on other people, even when called upon by the governor and the mayor to, to be aware that when they cough, spit, and even breathe into the air without a mask, they are endangering other people. That seemed entirely absent. And that was the ideology of capitalism. You do what you please, as modeled by our president ripping off his mask, COVID
Oh,
notwithstanding.
oh, so true.
How about
And
you?
I've been reading all over
Yeah.
Facebook how people in New York City are just shocked that because it was the center of the pandemic, we're New York refugees. It was many people died, people we know. Yeah, so it's shocking that it's happening even in, mostly blue areas.
States.
This week, for me at home, I wanted to, we all got the big announcement, and we're going to probably talk about it later in the show, that Trump had COVID. And it affected me, not personally or whatever, but the fact that Trump had COVID and he was going to Walter Reed and all those things, and that the news cycle had to follow it, which I need to follow the news, especially when it's Trump is incapacitated and has not relinquished power to a more hopefully sane, undrugged individual. The anxiety level went shot through the roof, and I found it very difficult to do the things that I need to do. Finish my work, plan for the next day, go to the store and know exactly how much to buy. Are we going to, what? Just to have to shift all of my entire way of supporting myself, my family, and then to manage my emotions around it so I could be present for a toddler who's too young to understand all of that. And it was just, I'm not sure if it's capitalism I'm talking about or the political situation, but to me, that's what struck me, is that I was taken away from my duties by something that is a once every 5 years, or excuse me, 50 years type of thing. The shooting of a president, the death or potential grave illness of the president of the United States. Now he's back home, and now we're still waiting. And so now I got to still check. And just the heightened level of anxiety, right on top of the disgust after having watched the debate and learned about Trump's taxes and his money laundering scheme. Just it was a bit much. It was a bit much, to be able to function properly on the personal level. So I feel like that's what really affected me this week.
Well, the news story that most affected me was the news stories of contradictory reports about how the president is doing, that the president is on oxygen, that the president is severely ill, that the president's vital signs are great, and there's nothing to worry about at all. That the sense of constantly being lied to, the sense of not knowing where you are because you're in a nation in which an irresponsible leader is and his staff are giving constantly contradictory messages. So you don't know who to believe, what to believe, and you're in limbo from all of these contradictory stories, all of which could be lies. And when I first
Mm.
heard it, I thought, oh, well, he's making this up so he doesn't have to debate. He obviously stinks at that. Or, well, maybe he'll mess up the election this way. He'll be out of it. Pence's name will be on. But Trump has already gotten some ballots, and then they'll have other people's names, and they'll have to postpone the election, which is his heart's desire. Or maybe it's that he isn't sick at all, but wants to shift the discussion from the failing recovery economically, from the 60 and over 60% of people who are in economic trouble, and the 40% that are in desperate economic trouble, and the fact that we have more deaths than any other nation on earth that counts the deaths. Instead, it's how is our dear president doing? So that I was totally flummoxed. What can you believe? And when you're counting on a liar, you can't, you never know. You are constantly guessing and worrying because you cannot know. And that's what affected me deeply.
Hmm. Yeah. And the funny part is, you and I spoke earlier about what we wanted our main topic to be. And we were both like, how about how lies in capitalism affect you? And we're going to talk about that in the second half of the show. But I feel like the whole show is that, because it colored everything I was thinking as we were starting to prepare. And one of the news stories, picking between what affected me in capitalism, one of the things that I went through this past week since we spoke last was I went and had a mammogram because I had a lump. I don't do a yearly mammogram. You may yell at me in the comments. You will find out more about that as I quickly go through this. But trusting the medical industrial complex is something I find difficult. And, you know, you want to trust science, but the intersection of science and medicine and capitalism lead to the inability to trust that. So I went for the mammogram, and I couldn't just kind of worry about my problem and hope that it was okay. I also worried about, is this really good? Is it going to detect enough? Is that, who's paying for this? How is it? All of that, following the money kind of thing. And as I was thinking of that, I saw this news story that just came out in Politico yesterday. So I think we've transitioned into the news here. But Donald Trump is taking the advice of profit-driven, obviously, pharmaceutical corporations over his own public health agencies and experts. Now, I want to underscore that these are his own public health agencies and experts. He has destroyed some of these public health agencies, and his experts are, can we trust them or not? You have to take them on an individual basis based on their history, because he is trying to drown government oversight of corporations in a bathtub. Anyway, Trump is blocking the Food and Drug Administration from imposing tougher safety requirements on the authorization of a coronavirus vaccine. See, the drug company executives privately voiced disapproval with the push for stricter federal standards. And what I saw in Politico is reporting that the White House's decision to halt the release of the new standards for emergency authorization, this is a quote, of a COVID-19 vaccine came after officials close to Trump told the FDA that the pharmaceutical industry had objected to those tougher requirements. So now what? How do we
Yeah.
trust a vaccine?
Well, we can't. I mean, this fits in with the lies because you know that Trump will choose whatever vaccine merchant is giving money to Trump and his campaign, or whichever he has personally invested in, and so have his children. And so that we don't know if this vaccine will be trustworthy. If they come out with a vaccine, it will probably be insufficiently tested and untrustworthy and might be even worse than the disease. So we get back to lying again. And Americans, of course, are always subjected to lies. Every ad that you see, whether on the internet or on television, or even before the movie that you paid for when you could go to the movies, is a lie. The best, the fastest, the most secure, whatever they say, you know that they're probably lying to enhance their own profit. And so we're constantly lied to. And now our president and his people, his appointees, are liars. His doctors give contradictory reports, so we don't actually know which one is the liar. QAnon gets away with telling outrageous lies. And a colleague of mine has quite a few QAnon clients. And she said what they all share is they've been terribly lied to as children. And so they will believe that they're lied to and that the real truth is something terrible. And I
Okay.
think,
The the
go
fact
for
that I don't want to cut you off, but I was thinking while you were talking about Santa Claus, the original major lie that we tell our kids, that I tried not to tell her. I tried, but like all of society is Santa Claus this and Santa Claus that. You know, that's not the only lie, obviously, but it's a major one. And a lot of kids who have had that are, and they, they're devastated when they find out. Not to mention that mommy, not this, hopefully not any of us, but a lot of people are, no, mommy's not angry. I think
Yeah,
you are. You know what I mean? There's just lies everywhere.
there sure are. One of the big lies that some children find out later is mommy loves you. No, she doesn't. She's doing all sorts of things that are very dangerous and could get rid of you, and resents that you were born, and resents her situation and is taking out on you. I do this for you, as you smack the kid.
Oh,
That's a lie. You're doing it and 1 out of 10 Americans not only spanks their kid, but hits them with objects when they're angry. And that's by self report, nothing you'd think people would brag about and falsify. So that we do this because we love you while we brutalize you and are out of control is a big lie. In fact, the whole family romance of the United States is a huge lie. The family is not an eternal organization. The family, as it's configured, the isolated nuclear family, is not an eternal organization. The family as itself was built
wait, Harriet,
on
pause here
economic
because
necessity.
because this is the nut of our big presentation. So I want to take a quick pause here to before we get into it to that um to do some business related activities,
Okay.
since we're kind of here at the middle of the show. But now, I want to thank the people who contributed to our patreon.com
Yay.
page. We had several contributors and we really appreciate that. As we mentioned last time, Harriet and I are doing this out of the love of our hearts, but we pay the editor, Brian, and we are part of the group Democracy at Work, who is lovingly, so we need to kind of make ourselves self-supporting. And one of the reasons we're coming weekly is because we think that maybe basically the free therapy is useful to people, especially at this time of like increased anxiety. And I know how helpful it is to me to put what I'm feeling in context of what's happening on the greater socio-political spectrum. It's always been very liberating. So that's why Harriet and I are coming once a week as opposed to what was every other week. But we're hoping that we can cover our costs And we understand that people are in desperate and dire financial straits. So if that is your situation, just skip, we have no, if you can share us on the internet, that would help. Share us with your rich
Yeah,
friends, the people who still have the
yeah.
jobs.
And your poor
That
friends
helps.
too. Yes.
Yeah, your poor friends. Yeah, your poor friends too. Share us anywhere that you see fit. But if you do have a few dollars that you can spare every month, we ask that you can go to Patreon, which is if you don't know it, it's a platform for supporting work like this that, we don't have a store where we sell t-shirts. We just do this. Patreon, it's patreon.com, patreon.com, and then just look for Capitalism Hits Home. So patreon.com/capitalism hits home. And you can sign up to give us $1 a month, $30 a month, $800 a month, whatever you can afford, and whatever you feel that the service that we're rendering is how it's helpful to you with no guilt. We get it. We clearly we understand. So
Yes.
if you can do that, that helps us. And I really appreciate seeing the numbers tick up just a little bit from the last time after we made the ask. So it does keep us kind of hopeful. They gave us 90 days at Democracy at Work to be able to cover our expenses. And we are like 2 weeks in to 90 days and a little far off, but I won't, we're not going to discuss. But if you can, great. Harriet, your thoughts here?
Well, I think it's wonderful if people are moved to give us $1 a month, if that's what they could afford, or whatever they can, because we need to keep people aware that what goes on in the outside world is deeply affecting our personal lives, particularly as 87% of Americans report that they're highly anxious and upset.
Mm.
And you don't need to be very skilled to see the anxiety everywhere. Yeah. And the anxiety is not irrational. We're being lied to. We don't know where we are. We don't know what will happen. We don't know if there'll be a vaccine that actually works. We get conflicting reports. And there are different stories, even from the president's doctors. And so that we're constantly anxious.
Oh,
And in our
Harriet, that
anxiety,
leads us right in to our
yes, it
our
does.
our big topic for today, which we kind of already got into in the news stories because it's just basically everywhere. I was noting, so our big story for today, our big topic is how to stay sane while we're constantly being lied to, and how we're being lied to, and how it intersects with capitalism. When I was thinking about this, what occurred to me is my daughter's fairy tale book has so many stories about lying and not lying, and how lying hurts people. The Boy Who Cried Wolf is one of her favorites right now. She's really what she's
Yeah,
coming to become aware of what that is and how lying hurts people. And I was like, boy, Trump is really he is the president who cried wolf. He
poster
lies
boy.
so many times that people cannot possibly believe him. And I think, Harriet, you made such a great point that people do not want to be made a fool of. People are traumatized, as you said, from a childhood of being lied to in whatever way, be it by television that tells you your life is going to be better once you visit Mickey Mouse. Your parents will definitely not fight on that trip, or whatever and whatnot. And people are hurt around that. And you were about to say, kind of the crux of this is the lies that we are told and we are asked, bought into by the powers that be around family. Can you give us a little bit of history there,
Yes,
Harriet?
I certainly can. Well, first, there's two parts of this. One is children are trained in lies because they're supposed to believe that what their parents do is in their best interest when it often is quite obviously not in their best interest, like beating them. And they also are told that they're so lucky to have such a wonderful family, whether they do or not. I mean, no parents say, we always wanted to be insufficient parents when we were little, and now we had you. No, they don't. And, when grandchildren are brought to visit, if they are, you can tell from their welcome that they're not welcome often. But nobody's going to say, it's bad enough we had you. We don't want the second shift. Get out of here. Even though you might. You might
Oh,
feel it.
God.
At one point, when she was older, my sister's apartment burned down,
Ooh.
and she had to go live with my parents, who said, "You're welcome to stay here," and made it such a living hell. They got out as fast as they could, get the insurance money, and live in a hotel, you know. And I think what happens is we're asked to believe things that we know aren't true, but don't admit to ourselves are not true. And we have to believe the adults because our lives depend on it. And when you look at this family structure, the history that you referred to is really interesting. There's a guy named Jacques Donzelot who studied this in France, and then there are examples in England as well. But he did such a great job, even though he writes in the turgid prose of French academics. So if you want to read it, great, but it's not a page turner. In any
We'll just
case,
listen to you describe it. I'm sure that would be easier.
yes, what he documented is that after the French Revolution, France was in chaos. People had been demanding state support for children, state support for everyone in a family to be in a family. And children do not have to grow up in families. Well, the remnants after the French Revolution were the beginning of the capitalist class that was just emerging, the feudal lords and ladies who had not been killed or dispossessed, and the Catholic Church, which was a huge feudal landlord and wildly rich, as it is today. However, those were
Oh,
the people
sorry, my
left.
face. I'm still
Yeah,
mad about Catholicism. That can be another show. Go ahead.
yeah, another show. In any case, what happened was they met together in documented meetings to decide, what can we do? They're demanding state support for children. We don't want to support these children. What can we do? Women are getting pregnant with no support, and kids aren't being brought up to be the workers of the next generation. The feudal family, where the head of the family governed everyone's life, who could get married, who could do what, who had to work, who had to obey whom, that was over when the feudal serfs had to leave the estates and the feudal society was crumbling. So they had to find something to put in place that didn't cost them and that gave the families a commitment to the new capitalist class that was emerging. And what
Hmm.
they came upon was establishing the nuclear family, where every man is the feudal lord of his own family, that every woman gets protection in childbirth, although she has to defer and obey and do domestic work for this man, and the children were chattel, who you could rent out or use or do whatever you wanted, but they were little slaves. And so that everybody got to be protected, and every man had an incentive to stay on the job to support this family. And the way they enforced it is they gave no one a job unless they had a dependent wife and children. And so the incentive was enormous because people were dispossessed. The serfs were off the land and had no way of going back. People were unemployed and desperate. Some were employed to keep down others from stealing and so on, but that was insufficient. And so they came upon the nuclear family. And that decision was made across the countries in Europe as they got rid of feudalism. It made a man totally responsible and devoted to capitalism and his job. It gave the woman power to dominate the children and protection in pregnancy. They didn't have the pill or anything then. And children were brought up in an authoritarian household where they had to subordinate themselves and be ready for work, to know the lines of dominance and submission, and therefore be ready to work in capitalist America, France, although America was a different thing because we came later, France, England, Germany, etc. And so it caught on. It was a human invention which was invented to keep people in their place working for capitalist masters and not demanding that the government support the next generation that will serve the capitalists and the government.
Oh,
And
this is
that
old
is
stuff.
not
We're still
something we're
living.
taught in school.
No, and we're
Sorry.
still living through the ramifications of this.
We sure are. And we're still living as if the family is holy grail. In fact, 1 in 10 families, the children don't live with the parents, and 75% of children don't live with their biological parents for most of their lives anyway, because 42% of kids are born outside of any kind of long lasting marriage, and marriages don't last that long. And so that the eternal joy of the family is a big lie. And so we
That
get
was so
accustomed
hard for me. Sorry,
to
that was
lie.
a hard one for me to accept personally
Yes,
because
it is
I,
hard.
yeah. I mean, I was brought up, everyone had that same lie. And then we
Yes,
also in
we
my
shared it.
family had people like who were, as a therapist of mine once put it, they didn't have your best interests at heart. That was the way she would underline, like, instead of being like, that one has got this and this one is stealing the money, she would just say, they didn't have your best interests in mind or at heart for sure, which I always found
Absolutely.
helpful. And
I
and
find that
just to
helpful
come to
too.
the awareness and what does it mean? Because you think, oh, my family, and there's protection from outside horribleness and the devil, I guess I'll just take this inside horribleness because out there, no one loves me. There was just this, it was very challenging to come to terms with the fact
Very.
that family isn't what it's made out to be.
Absolutely. And in my experience, and I did feel that. I lived with several different relatives when my father signed up to go overseas instead of be a doctor in the US, and my mother had a breakdown. And I learned from each, the families had different religions and practices, and I learned they were all full of crap, really, because they were all absolute and they all differed, the absolute rules of the family, and they all pretended to love us. So the lie was more, although I believed it because my mother kept telling us how lucky we were to have such a perfect family, and it was troubling to hear that this was the best you could do. But of course, I accepted it because kids will believe anything.
Mm.
And so, and also, these days, people are doomed to their families because they have to stay home. And that's why child abuse has
Oh,
spiked, wife abuse has spiked, and also because kids can't go to school where the teacher notices they're bruised and
mm.
where the nurse notices they're bruised. And so that people are constrained to these families, and the family is hardly your ultimate protection. Any psychotherapist should be able to tell you that.
Harriet, we've gotten the 5-minute warning about a minute or two ago.
I
So
heard it.
unfortunately, we are winding up our conversation today when I feel that we have basically just kind of scratched the surface. And so the trauma, just the nut of it is we are living with the crazy father. Yeah, Trump and
Crazy
the whole
authoritarian
system.
father.
Yes, the whole system is being created to keep us unnerved, um, looking for truth, looking for any pillar in the storm. And having worked, I wanted to leave with a little bit of giving people something they can do in the day in order to hopefully get through some of this. And these are just three different things that I suggest to families who are living with active alcoholics or people who've succumbed to the drug use epidemic, active addiction, because addiction it causes a lot of chaos in the family. And now we are all living through it as a nation. The idea is to live, you've heard this before, but it's maybe hopefully a helpful reminder at this moment to just live this one day, just live the one day at a time and try not to project out into the future. The reason that that is suggested is because if you are centered in this one day, even if something should come up, you will be in a position to make a better decision about that. You won't have been panicked for 3 months in advance and then having, so that to center yourself in this day. And one of the other slogans is "This too shall pass." I'm hoping sooner rather than later. But it does remind me, it does help me to remember that this is not going to be forever situation. And just for this day, I can hopefully handle it. And the other third one I thought of is to trust yourself. You have the capacity to hear and know what is a lie, but you have to be able to access yourself. So whatever you can do to do that, whether it's sitting quietly for a few minutes, taking some deep breaths, really just committing that you're just going to live through this day and this day only, you can trust yourself. Don't trust the internet. Excuse my French. You know what I
Right.
mean? You have to
Yeah.
really just trust yourself. Harriet, are there things you'd
I
like to
have,
add for
I
tools?
would like to add that what we need most in this time of isolation is connection. And so it's important to connect with what you believe in and what you hope for, whether you can connect on the net as well as connect with friends however you can, connect with support systems. People are trying to hold on to Trump, who's a column of hot air. And so, of course, that doesn't work. And connect, connect, connect. Mental health is connection. The soul of a person is their connections. And so, to keep up your own soul, connect with other people who share your beliefs and care.
Harriet, thank you
And
so much for being on this podcast. I mean, it's your podcast and I just came in here. But I'm so
thank
grateful
you.
that you're doing this work and that I get to be a part of it. Thanks
And I
everyone
am
for
too.
listening. We hope you feel more connected with yourself, with us. We do read your comments. Please leave comments in the YouTube page under this. We read them and we take them into consideration. The podcast, again, is made possible by Democracy at Work. And we do ask that you support this project at patreon.com/capitalism hits home. That's for a recurring one. If you want to make a one-time donation, you can visit democracyatwork.info.
So
Final
thank
thoughts,
you
Harriet?
all for listening. And thank Brian for taping this and editing this and being so responsible and wonderful. And thank you, listeners, for listening. And please do send us your suggestions for topics. Send us your reactions. Connect with us.
Our Twitter
Bye bye.
handle is democracy at WRK, stands for work, WRK. Instagram, same, democracy at WRK. You can find myself on Twitter at Juliana Forlano. And Harriet's website is Harriet Fraud, HARRIET, Fraud, FRAAD.com. We'll see you next week.
See you next week. Bye bye.